Russia's air defenses have now undeniably failed. In recent months, Ukraine has launched an almost continuous wave of drone and missile attacks, and these strikes are no longer limited to occupied territories or areas just across the border. Ukrainian forces are destroying targets deep inside Russia on an almost nightly basis, and the Kremlin appears almost powerless to stop it. The core reason is a single, fatal vulnerability that has left millions of square miles of Russian territory effectively open to Ukrainian attack. Vladimir Putin and Russia's leadership never imagined events would unfold this way. When the full-scale invasion began in February 2022, the Kremlin was sure of a quick and relatively painless victory. Much of the world agreed, with even the most optimistic Western analysts predicting that Ukraine would struggle to offer serious resistance. At best, it was assumed that Ukrainian forces might manage to dig in, hold their positions for a while, and use that time to negotiate some kind of compromise peace deal. Almost nobody envisioned that, 3 years into the war, Ukraine would be routinely destroying Russian pipelines, fuel depots, and oil refineries with pinpoint accuracy and lethal efficiency. Yet that is exactly what has happened. Ukraine has astonished the world, defied all expectations, and now finds itself in its strongest strategic position in years. In 2025 alone, according to data from Ukraine's security service, the SBU, Ukrainian forces have carried out close to 160 successful strikes against Russian oil extraction and refining infrastructure. This was revealed by SBU Chief Vasyl Malyuk at a press briefing in Kyiv on October 31st. He explained that 20 of those attacks took place in September and October alone, and that they included strikes on 6 major oil refineries, 2 terminals, 3 fuel depots, and 9 pumping stations. Malyuk stressed that these are entirely legitimate military targets. Oil extraction and refining account for around 90% of Russia's defense budget. These are the dirty petro-rubles that finance the war against Ukraine. From his perspective, facilities such as oil refineries and fuel depots are 100% fair and logical targets, because they are essential to keeping both the Kremlin's war machine running and Russia's wider economy afloat. It is only because of its huge oil sector that Russia has been able to sustain this war for so long. So even if pipelines or pumping stations might not sound as dramatic as bomb factories or air bases, they are arguably among the most valuable and critical elements of Russia's military infrastructure, and Ukraine is doing a remarkable job of systematically taking them out. Dozens of these vital nodes in Russia's fuel and oil network have been shattered and set on fire by Ukrainian tactical drone swarms and precision-guided missiles. The consequences, from Russia's point of view, have been disastrous. The country has been plunged into an unprecedented fuel crisis. Malyuk notes that Russia's domestic fuel shortages have surged to around 20%, while approximately 37% of its oil refining capacity has been knocked offline. Reports of fuel deficits are coming in from at least half of Russia's regions, and Moscow has been forced to respond by banning gasoline exports until at least the end of 2025. Hundreds of Russian gas stations have been forced to shut down altogether because they simply have no fuel to sell. Many of those that remain open have imposed tight restrictions on how much fuel people can buy and which grades they are allowed to purchase. Millions of Russians are paying more for fuel than they have in many years, and large numbers are struggling to find it in sufficient quantities. Drivers are often forced to wait in line for hours just to fill their tanks so they can commute to work and return home. Meanwhile, Ukraine's strikes show no sign of slowing down. In fact, on the very same day Malyuk spoke in Kyiv, news broke of yet another major attack, this time targeting one of Russia's most important military fuel pipelines in the Moscow region. Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence, the GUR, published a detailed account of the operation on Telegram. According to the report, on October 31st, 2025, a special operation carried out by Ukraine's Ministry of Defense disabled a highly significant military facility belonging to the Russian aggressor state. This target was the Koltsovoy, or Ring, oil pipeline, which supplied the Russian occupation army with the fuel it used to wage a genocidal war against the Ukrainian people. The pipeline forms a ring stretching nearly 250 miles, around 400 kilometers in total. It is a crucial logistical artery for Russia's armed forces, providing a constant, steady stream of fuel to power the Russian war machine. At maximum throughput, the pipeline can deliver up to 3 million tons of jet fuel, about 2.8 million tons of diesel, and around 1.6 million tons of gasoline. All of this flows from major Russian refineries located near large cities such as Moscow, Nizhny Novgorod, and Ryazan. However, according to the GUR's account, all 3 of the main fuel lines in this system were destroyed near the Ramensky district, a short distance southeast of Moscow. The GUR report highlighted another critical detail. An anti-drone net and paramilitary guards had been deployed to protect the facility, yet they were useless. All 3 branches of the pipeline system transporting gasoline, diesel, and aviation fuel exploded successfully and simultaneously. The installation was rendered inoperative. In other words, Russia had specifically installed anti-drone defenses to shield this pipeline and stationed paramilitary personnel nearby to watch the skies and engage any hostile drones approaching the area. On paper, this location had at least some level of air defense coverage, yet those defenses failed completely. This has become a recurring pattern in recent weeks and months across many reports of successful Ukrainian strikes on Russian infrastructure. Time after time, Russia tries to fortify a vital asset with defensive systems to protect it from Ukrainian drones and missiles, only to watch those defenses prove as ineffective as blunt knives or dummy munitions. It is also crucial to stress that Ukraine is not behaving the way Russia does. The Kremlin has repeatedly launched massive, record-setting swarms of drones over the border into Ukrainian cities and towns. In one attack in early September, for example, Russia is believed to have sent around 805 drones in a single operation. Russian commanders also do not hesitate to hurl large numbers of missiles at Ukraine, often following drone swarms with at least a dozen missiles or more. Ukraine does not operate with that kind of volume. It does not possess the resources or capacity to launch drones and other weapons in such large quantities. Even its largest and most famous attack on Russian territory, Operation Spiderweb in June, involved only 117 drones in total. So Ukraine is not simply copying Russia's tactics by trying to overwhelm air defenses through sheer numbers. Instead, Ukraine's attacks are generally smaller in scale, at least in terms of the number of drones and missiles used. Yet they still routinely inflict huge damage and leave behind billions of dollars worth of destroyed or burning infrastructure. Somehow, even with more limited resources and fewer weapons in each wave, Ukrainian strikes keep slipping past Russian defensive systems that Putin and his inner circle have long proclaimed as some of the best on the planet. If this happened only occasionally, it might be dismissed as a run of bad luck. But it happens again and again, across vast stretches of Russia. Just days before the pipeline operation, for example, Ukrainian drones were sighted over several Russian regions and major cities, including Moscow itself. Even though there were no reports of large-scale destruction in the Kremlin's core district, the simple fact that Ukrainian drones reached the capital at all was shocking for multiple reasons. First, Moscow lies roughly 300 miles from the Ukrainian border, so in theory, it should be impossible for ordinary drones to cover that distance across so much Russian territory without being detected and shot down long before they neared the city. Second, as Russia's wealthiest, most populous, and most important city, and the seat of its government and elite, Moscow should have some of the most formidable air defenses anywhere in the world. It should be capable of intercepting top-tier cruise and ballistic missiles, and therefore should have no trouble dealing with a few dozen relatively inexpensive drones. Yet after that incident, a now famous photo went viral that perfectly captured Russia's predicament. The image showed one of Russia's mobile air defense units guarding the Kremlin. In reality, the unit was nothing more than 2 soldiers and a machine gun mount bolted onto the bed of a civilian pickup truck. Behind them stood the iconic walls of the Moscow Kremlin, the symbolic heart of the Russian state. The picture became a powerful visual metaphor for the extent of Russia's decline, as well as a precise illustration of the single fatal flaw in its air defense posture. Quite simply, Russia does not have enough air defenses in the places that matter most. Its commanders have concentrated the bulk of their defensive assets in occupied Ukrainian territories and in border regions, leaving huge gaps and relatively unprotected zones deeper inside Russia. George Barros, who leads the Russia team and co-leads the geospatial intelligence team at the Institute for the Study of War, has noted that once you move past the initial air defense shell around the active front in Ukraine, the rest of Russia is riddled with holes and vulnerabilities. Sasha Brookman, a military analyst at the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London, agrees and adds that Ukrainian strikes have significantly depleted Russia's stock of air defense assets, putting the Kremlin in an increasingly fragile position. Russia has lost many air defense systems over the last 2 years, so it is very plausible that large sections of its territory now lie within gaps in radar and missile coverage, making successful Ukrainian attacks much easier. Several main factors underpin this uneven and inadequate air defense coverage. The first, as Brookman highlights, is that Ukraine has physically destroyed a large number of Russian systems since the war began, especially throughout 2024 and 2025, when Ukraine perfected its drone warfare tactics and dramatically ramped up the frequency and intensity of its deep strikes. Time and again, supposedly world-class systems like the S-300 and S-400, and even the newer S-500, have been destroyed, along with the powerful radar arrays that supply them with targeting data to identify and intercept incoming threats. Each one of these systems can cost millions of dollars to build. So when Ukraine manages to damage or wipe out a battery or radar complex, it is no trivial matter for Russia to replace it. This is particularly true now, while Russia's economy is in such dire condition. The Kremlin is forced to allocate what resources it has somewhat carefully, and it has clearly prioritized the production of more drones, missiles, and other offensive weaponry over the reconstruction of defensive networks. That choice has come at a serious cost to its ability to protect its own territory. The second key factor is Russia's sheer size. It is the largest country on Earth, stretching across 11 time zones and covering more than 6.6 million square miles, or roughly 17 million square kilometers. It is divided into numerous regions, republics, and territories, encompassing hundreds of cities ranging from small urban centers of tens of thousands of people to sprawling metropolises of several million, plus countless towns, villages, and settlements. Even a small country often has blind spots in its air defense coverage. For Russia, defending everything is practically impossible. To blanket its entire landmass with radar, missiles, and interceptor platforms would require an unimaginable number of systems. Even back when Russia's economy was stronger and its military was widely viewed as the second most powerful in the world, this would have been an enormous challenge. Now, with limited assets and under constant pressure, it is completely out of reach. Russia has no choice but to work with a finite number of systems, and Ukraine's ongoing precision strikes keep whittling that number down. Each time Russia loses a missile battery, a radar site, or a launcher, its defenses weaken a bit more. The gaps in coverage widen just enough to allow more Ukrainian drones and missiles to sneak through. Moscow is forced into a constant game of catch-up, scrambling to plug holes in its air defenses with whatever it can find. That is how we end up with scenes like pairs of soldiers wielding machine guns, being tasked with defending the Kremlin's government buildings and historic landmarks. This shortage of sophisticated systems is also one of the reasons why Vladimir Putin recently signed laws that allow Russia to deploy reservists to protect regional infrastructure from future drone attacks. The situation is clearly desperate. Rather than relying primarily on advanced air defense platforms and high-speed interceptor missiles to secure its skies, Russia is forced to lean on groups of men armed with Kalashnikovs and other small arms to try to bring down incoming drones. The third and final factor driving Russia's increasingly feeble air defense posture can be summed up in 2 words: arrogance and incompetence. From the very start of the invasion, Russia has shown both in abundance. Its arrogance was evident right away. In the early days of the war, some Russian units that crossed into Ukraine were ordered to bring ceremonial parade uniforms, because their commanders expected they would soon be marching triumphantly through the streets of Kiev. The incompetence soon became clear as well. Russia squandered many of the advantages of its air force and failed to secure air superiority, despite fielding more numerous and advanced aircraft than Ukraine. On the ground, its expensive tanks were sent into minefields or funneled into narrow urban streets where small groups of Ukrainians could ambush and destroy them. Russia believed it was far too powerful to lose. It expected to smash through any defensive lines Ukraine tried to establish, raise the Russian flag over Kiev, seize the Donbass and other regions with minimal trouble, and then celebrate a decisive and overwhelming victory. Within that mindset, it is easy to see why Russian planners probably did not take seriously the possibility that Ukraine would be able to strike deep into Russian territory with drones or missiles. At the outset, such a scenario would have seemed absurd. As a result, instead of investing heavily in a resilient, well-distributed air defense network across its territory, Russia focused overwhelmingly on offensive operations. It pushed tanks, armored vehicles, and mechanized brigades across the border in a relentless campaign driven by conquest and territorial ambition, rarely pausing to consider what might happen if Ukraine managed to strike back. Now, Russia is paying the price. Ukraine understands the weaknesses in Russia's air defenses. In many cases, Ukrainian forces created those gaps by destroying key systems, and they are exploiting them more and more frequently. While not every Ukrainian strike is a massive success, some have inflicted truly devastating levels of damage. In April, for instance, a Ukrainian explosives-laden drone hit one of Russia's Shahed drone factories in the Republic of Tatarstan, more than 600 miles, or around 1,000 kilometers, from the Ukrainian border. Before the war, the idea that a Ukrainian drone could travel so far inside Russia and blow up such a critical piece of military infrastructure would have seemed ridiculous. Now it is simply part of Russia's new normal. Russia's long-range radar coverage has grown increasingly patchy, and its ability to intercept even slow-moving targets like drones has become embarrassingly weak. Around Moscow, the situation is somewhat different, since Russian commanders have at least tried to construct multiple layers of radar and missile defenses in a ring around the capital. This has been confirmed by Alexei, a Ukrainian deputy commander responsible for air defense units on the northern side of Kyiv, who notes that there is a high concentration of Russian air defense around Moscow, and that it is difficult for Ukrainian drones to reach the city center. Even so, the late October drone incursion demonstrated that some Ukrainian drones can still penetrate Moscow's airspace. Beyond the capital, most of Russia's other large cities are much less protected, and many smaller towns and settlements are almost defenseless against even modest aerial attacks. For Ukraine, however, one final hurdle remains. Despite all the gaps and fatal flaws in Russia's air defense network, Kyiv still does not yet have enough firepower to fully exploit those weaknesses everywhere, all the time. The Ukrainian armed forces have certainly achieved tremendous results with their drone and missile campaigns, and continue to analyze Russian vulnerabilities and plan new deep strike operations. They are also working relentlessly to upgrade their drone fleet and strengthen their missile arsenal. Recent announcements have highlighted new systems such as the Long Neptune missile, the Flamingo with its enormous range of up to 1,900 miles, or about 3,000 kilometers, and the Sapsan ballistic missile, Ukraine's first domestically built weapon of its kind. Unfortunately, even though President Volodymyr Zelensky has confirmed that these systems have been tested and are expected to enter serial production in the near future, they are not yet readily available in the kinds of quantities needed to regularly hit Russia's most valuable and sensitive targets. To truly maximize the damage it can inflict, Ukraine still needs more support from its international partners. That help is starting to arrive. Additional Storm Shadow missiles have recently reached Kiev from the United Kingdom, and Ukraine is exerting heavy pressure on Germany to approve the transfer of long-range Taurus missiles. Kiev is also continuing negotiations with the Trump administration in the United States over potential deliveries of Tomahawk missiles or other long-range systems that would open up a wide new range of targets across Russia. If Ukraine is able to secure such weapons or produce sufficient numbers of its own long-range missiles, Russia will be unable to protect its key infrastructure. At that point, there will be virtually nothing stopping Ukraine from striking almost anywhere within Russian territory. If you want to learn more about how Ukraine is shifting the balance of this war, watch our video that examines how Putin suffered one of his worst months yet in October, with massive losses and only minimal gains on the battlefield. Or check out our other report on a recent Ukrainian drone operation that caused serious chaos at oil depots, fuel bases, and railway lines across occupied Crimea. Remember to subscribe to our trusted channel for more breaking updates, detailed analysis, and informed forecasts about how the Russia-Ukraine war is evolving and what may come next.